I'm Hannah Cole, 34, and at 2:17 a.m., the light from my phone paints my ceiling a cold blue, while messages stack one after another, each more frantic than the last. Hannah, answer, it's an emergency, then another and another, the kind of chorus that makes sleep feel like a rumor. I scroll and stop when a news alert flashes a photo I know too well, my brother Brandon, eyes bloodshot, mouth caught in a half smile that always meant someone else would clean up the mess. The headline says, "What My Parents Won't: Federal Charges, Wire Fraud, Millions Missing." The phone vibrates again, and my mother's voice breaks through as if distance is a thin wall. "Please, you have to help him," while my father insists I'm a lawyer and can fix anything with a call. I stand at the window, the city glittering like a promise I kept to myself, and tell them I'll fly out in the morning to talk nothing more. When the call ends, the room is quiet, except for my heartbeat steady for once, sure in a way it never was when I stood in my parents' kitchen. I start a list not of favors but of boundaries. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to draw a hard line with family, tap like and subscribe so this story finds the people who need it. I grew up in Hartford, in a small cape with a narrow driveway and a backyard maple that turned the whole kitchen window red each October. We were taught to work hard to be polite, to keep our word, even when no one was watching. My mother prized grace under pressure, my father prized results, and I learned early to hold my shoulders level no matter the score, no matter who clapped. Music and debate trophies ended up in boxes, while my brother's baseball balls lined a custom shelf, and I told myself it didn't matter because the work mattered most. When scholarships ran thin, I took night shifts, pulled loans, and later moved to Chicago to build the kind of life that paid on time and kept a full pantry, the kind where you buy your own couch in cash and remember what it feels like to breathe. Chicago gave me quiet, a condo with clean lines and a routine that fit like a well-tailored coat, morning runs by the lake cases with clean spreadsheets, a partner who showed up early and stayed late for the right reasons. Ethan never asked me to be less, never told me to wait while someone else figured it out. He just set a place at the table and made room for my briefcase. Marissa, my mentor, taught me how to keep my tone steady when someone tried to push me off balance and how to measure twice before I said yes. I kept a separate emergency fund, learned to track deadlines as if they were promises, and told myself that boundaries are not barricades. They are doors you open from your side. Even so, 6 months ago I stood at my own window after a burst pipe turned my living room into a shallow pond, insurance backlogged, and contractors booked, and I asked my parents for a short loan to cover temporary housing. $12,000 would have kept me near my office, kept the case on track, kept my life from sliding. They said they couldn't help right now and hoped I understood. 2 days later, a photo popped up of my parents on a chartered boat, grinning under Florida sun. Celebrating Brandon's new venture with a caption and a price tag I didn't need to see to know. I found a sublet, borrowed the firm's conference room for late nights, and paid every bill on time because that is what you do when help doesn't come. I told myself I would not keep a ledger, but the numbers wrote themselves anyway. So when my phone lit the ceiling tonight and my mother's voice pleaded while my father's voice tried to sound certain, I heard something under the urgency I hadn't noticed before: habit. The habit of believing I will show up and smooth the edges. The habit of calling me only when the house catches fire and laying the hose at my feet. I am a corporate finance attorney, not a criminal defense lawyer. I understand the difference between a balance sheet and a federal indictment, and I know better than to step into a courtroom where I don't belong. But I also know planes leave O'Hare every hour, and sometimes the only way to stop a pattern is to look it in the eye. I packed a suit, a notebook, and a list with 3 lines: recommend counsel, no money therapy required, and slid my piano medal into the side pocket, a reminder that the girl who once played to empty chairs learned to take a bow without waiting for permission. The lake was black glass when I finally lay down, but sleep stayed where it was. I watched the ceiling and thought about the house in Hartford, the narrow hall full of photographs that begin and end with Brandon, the mantle that used to hold my graduation picture until something newer needed the space. I thought about the people who trusted my parents' good name because they thought it meant something, and about what it might mean tomorrow when I land and walk through a door that has always swung one way. In the morning, I'll turn my phone to airplane mode and make the flight that takes me back to the museum of our family story, where every plaque has my brother's name etched deep. I'll ask for the documents, read the transfers, and tell the truth in a voice that does not tremble. And before the day is over, I'll place one thing on their mantle: they did not expect terms. The morning I arrived in Hartford, the sky hung low and gray, the kind of light that made every color look tired. My parents' house stood at the end of the quiet cul-de-sac, where nothing ever seemed to change. The shutters were still the same dark green my father had painted when I was a teenager, and the maple tree in the front yard had grown wide enough to brush against my car as I pulled into the driveway. I sat there for a long moment before cutting the engine, staring at the house that had once meant safety. From the outside, it looked just as I remembered. Inside, I knew it would feel smaller. When I stepped through the front door, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something older like dust that hadn't been moved in years. Every wall was lined with photographs of Brandon: baseball uniforms, graduation robes, and framed articles about his entrepreneurial success. His smile looked identical in every shot, confident, charming, like he had the world at his feet. My own photos were nowhere to be seen. The hallway that once held my debate medals and piano ribbons now glowed gold with his trophies. My mother rushed toward me first, her eyes, red hands fluttering like she didn't know where to place them. "Hannah, thank God you're here," she said, stopping just short of touching me. My father followed behind slower, his face drawn and pale. "We've been up all night," he said, his voice unsteady. "There's a lot to go over." I set my suitcase down in the entryway. "Then let's start with the case documents." We moved into the dining room where papers were spread across the table like fallen leaves: bank statements, court filings, printed emails, and a single property deed marked with a yellow note. "For Brandon's bail," my father said quietly. I froze, scanning the document. "You put up the house." "It's temporary," my mother said quickly. "The judge set bail at $600,000. We couldn't let him stay in jail." The numbers swam in front of me for a moment. I sank into a chair and flipped through the statements. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. Every page told a story of transfers, shell companies, investor deposits that disappeared into thin air. "This isn't just poor management," I said finally. "It's deliberate. You can see the pattern right here." My father rubbed his temples. "He made mistakes. That doesn't make him a criminal." I pointed to a line of transactions. "This shows 18 months of systematic fraud, Dad. That's not a mistake. It's a felony." My mother clasped her hands together, her voice barely above a whisper. He was desperate. His business was failing. He just didn't know what else to do. "Then maybe you shouldn't have wired him another $45,000 after you already gave him $60,000, I said before I could stop myself. Their silence told me everything I needed to know. I stood walking into the living room where the mantel looked just as it always had, except my law school graduation photo was gone. In its place hung a framed newspaper piece about Brandon's bar opening. "We needed to make room for new photos," my mother said quietly from behind me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Ethan's name lit the screen. I stepped onto the porch before answering. "How bad is it?" he asked. "They put up the house for bail," I said. "They've known about his money problems for months and said nothing. And apparently I've been erased from the family history." There was a pause, the sound of distant hospital noise on his end. "Remember what we talked about?" he said gently. "Boundaries. You don't owe them a rescue." "I know," I said. "I just can't walk away without facing it." "Then face it. But keep your ground, Hannah. I'll fly out this weekend if you need me." His steadiness calmed something in me that the house had stirred up. "I'll be okay," I said, though I wasn't sure yet. After hanging up, I called Marissa at the firm. Her voice came through crisp and steady. "Listen to me," she said. "Do not represent your brother. You're a finance attorney, not defense. Keep it professional. Recommend someone good, then step back." When I went back inside, my parents were standing shoulder to shoulder in the kitchen, whispering. They fell silent when they saw me. The prosecutor called, my father said. "Brandon's first hearing is Tuesday. If he violates bail conditions, you'll lose the house," I said, setting my briefcase down. "Do you understand that?" "We had no choice," my mother said, her eyes pleading. "What about your retirement accounts?" I asked. My father looked away. "Most of it's gone." We used it over the years for his business ventures. It hit me harder than I expected. Decades of savings gone to keep my brother's image afloat. They had handed him everything until there was nothing left to give. My phone chimed again, a message from the prosecutor's office, confirming my scheduled visit to the jail tomorrow. I looked at my parents, both exhausted, both desperate. "I've made some decisions," I said finally. Their eyes lit up with hope. My mother took a small step forward. "You'll help him. I'll recommend a criminal defense attorney," I said evenly. "Robert Keegan. He's handled federal cases like this before. But I won't give you money. And all three of you, me included, will attend family therapy, starting this week." My mother's expression crumpled. "After everything we've done for you," I met her eyes. "What exactly have you done for me that compares to what you've done for Brandon?" The silence that followed stretched long enough for the kitchen clock to tick through 2 full minutes. My father's face flushed, then faded to pale resignation. "We don't have much choice, do we?" he said quietly. "You always have choices," I said. "You just keep making bad ones." I turned toward the stairs before either of them could answer. "Hannah," my father called after me, his voice rough. "He's still your brother." I paused halfway up the stairs, one hand on the railing. "Yes," I said softly, "and that's the only reason I'm here." In my old bedroom, the walls were still painted the pale lavender I'd chosen at 16. The desk sat in the same corner, the twin bed neatly made. It was like walking into a time capsule of the girl I used to be. I spread the case notes across the quilt and began reviewing what I'd gathered from the prosecutor's office, emails, bank ledgers, the indictment outline. The evidence was airtight. Wire transfers linked directly to Brandon's bar accounts, matching his business trips to Las Vegas and Atlantic City. I stared at the pages until my vision blurred. The best possible outcome would be a plea deal. With good behavior, maybe 18 months in federal prison. I knew how to read between the lines of the law, and this one didn't leave room for miracles. As the house settled around me, pipes groaning, the old floorboards creaking, I lay back and stared at the ceiling. It was the same ceiling I used to study while planning my escape to college, to law school, to anywhere my brother's shadow couldn't reach. The anger that had once felt wild and uncontrollable now felt cool and steady like glass. Tomorrow, I would face Brandon across a table in the county jail, and for the first time in our lives, I would be the one holding all the cards. Outside, a storm moved in slow and deliberate rain, whispering against the window. I closed my eyes and listened the sound almost like applause, soft, distant, and earned. The county jail looked colder than I expected, even under September sunlight. The concrete walls stretched high-lined with coils of wire that shimmered faintly in the morning haze. Inside, the air felt heavy with bleach and time. A correctional officer led me down a corridor where every sound echoed footsteps, keys, a door closing somewhere far away. He stopped at a row of visitation cubicles and nodded toward an empty seat. "Visitor for Cole," he called out. The words carried through the room flat and impersonal. I sat down and placed a manila folder on the metal table. The chair was hard, the kind that made you sit straight whether you wanted to or not. My hands rested over the papers I already knew by heart, bank records, transfers, and forged signatures. The plexiglass barrier between the chairs was scratched so deeply it blurred the reflection of the guard standing near the wall. When the door at the end opened, the sound cut through the air like a snapped wire. Brandon stepped through wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. His hair, once styled for every photo our parents framed, fell in uneven strands over his forehead. He looked smaller somehow, but the moment his eyes met mine, the same familiar grin returned, the one that always came before an excuse. He dropped into the chair across from me, leaned back, and said, "So the big-time lawyer finally shows up. Took you long enough." I didn't answer. I opened the folder slowly and laid out the first page against the glass. "You look tired," I said evenly. He snorted. "Not everyone gets to sleep on silk sheets in Chicago. Must be nice having it all money, freedom, your fancy job." His tone carried an edge, something meant to hurt. "We need to talk about your case," I said. "Wire fraud, embezzlement, $2.5 million missing from investor accounts." He crossed his arms, still leaning back. "It's a misunderstanding. I can explain all of it. Can you explain the $850,000 from the Hendersons' retirement fund? I asked, sliding another page forward. They've known Mom and Dad for 20 years. They trusted you because of them. The color drained from his face just a little. That was supposed to be short-term. They knew I'd pay them back. These, I said, tapping the printouts, show 18 months of regular transfers to offshore accounts. And these I flipped to another section line up with your Vegas trips. He stared at me, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. You've been talking to the prosecutor, haven't you? I have, I said. Someone had to. Mom and Dad were too busy putting up the house for your bail to look at what you actually did. For a moment, his expression faltered. Then the smirk returned, practiced and smooth. You've always thought you were better than me. Perfect grades, perfect job. Must feel nice being the favorite for once. I almost laughed. Is that what they told you? That I never needed anything? They gave you everything, he snapped. Harvard Law. That condo I paid for law school, with loans and 2 jobs, I said quietly. And that condo, every square foot came from my own work. You're thinking of all the checks they wrote for you. His mouth opened, then closed again. The bravado flickered. You have to help me, he said finally. You know people. You can make this go away. I already talked to the prosecutor, I said, keeping my tone steady. She's offering a plea deal, 18 months in federal prison, 3 years supervised release restitution, and 6 months of home detention afterward. He blinked, eyes widening. You're kidding. 18 months, I can't do that. The alternative is 8 to 10 years if you go to trial, I said. The evidence isn't going anywhere. He leaned closer, pressing his hands against the glass. Hannah, you owe me. Remember high school? When I covered for you that night, you snuck out. I stared at him. You mean when you took Dad's car and I stayed home to keep you from getting caught? You're rewriting history, Brandon. His jaw tightened. You're just going to walk away. After everything. This isn't about childhood favors, I said. It's about what you did to people who trusted you, including our parents. For a long moment, he didn't move. The smirk fell away completely. His voice dropped. They could lose everything because of me. Something in his tone made me pause. There was fear there, real for once. Not for himself, but for them. I met his eyes. You should have thought about that before using their names to get investors. I was going to pay them back, he said, his voice catching. The market turned. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Save that for your statement, I said, gathering my papers. He stood abruptly. That's it. You're just leaving. I rose too, my chair scraping softly against the floor. You've made your choices. Now you live with them. As I walked toward the exit, his voice echoed behind me. You can't just walk away. We're family. The heavy security door closed between us, cutting his words in half. Outside, sunlight felt too bright against my face. I reached the car before I realized my hands were shaking. When I gripped the steering wheel, the tremor turned to stillness. Only then did the tears come quiet hot, not for him, but for the years I'd spent chasing a love that only existed when he failed. By the time I drove back to the house, the afternoon had turned gray. My parents were sitting side by side at the kitchen table waiting for me. My mother looked up first. How did it go? He'll take the plea deal, I said. It's the best option. She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table. My father said nothing, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee mug. The silence between them was heavy, with something I hadn't heard in years, doubt. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake in my old bed listening to rain tick against the window. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The pipes, the distant hum of the refrigerator, my mother's soft voice in the hallway. For the first time, I didn't try to block it out. When morning came, I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. The air smelled of dust and old paper. Boxes lined the walls labeled in my mother's neat handwriting, Christmas tax records, Brandon School. Near the back, one box caught my eye. The label read, Hannah Achievements. The handwriting faded. I pulled it forward, the cardboard scraping against the floor. Inside were things I hadn't seen in years, my valedictorian medal tangled in tinsel, the acceptance letter from Harvard folded in half, debate ribbons bent under holiday cards. I lifted the medal. its ribbon frayed, and held it to the light. Downstairs, I could see through the floor vent the gleam of Brandon's trophies displayed in their cases. My mother's voice floated up the stairs. "Lunch is ready. The lawyer you recommended is coming soon. I'll be down in a minute," I called back. She appeared at the top step anyway, wringing her hands. "What are you doing with all that old stuff?" "Just remembering," I said. "Why is my medal up here while Brandon's trophies have their own shelf?" She looked uncomfortable. "We meant to put them out. We just never got around to it. For 15 years I asked." Her mouth opened, then closed again. "Your father's on the phone with the financial advisor?" she said finally. "He's trying to liquidate some accounts for Brandon's defense." "Of course he is," I said quietly. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say more, then went back downstairs. I waited until I heard her voice drift away before pulling out the family financial folders my father always kept. I spread them across the floor: tuition payments, car purchases, business loans. The numbers told the story clearly. My parents had given Brandon more than $400,000 over 15 years. I found my own column barely $8,000. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by the evidence of a lifetime of imbalance. The sunlight slanted through the small attic window, turning the dust into gold flecks that floated above the papers. Then I began gathering what I needed: records, dates, copies, organizing them into neat piles. Tomorrow, I would not only show them what I found, but also what had to change. Downstairs, my father's voice carried faintly through the vent. "She'll come around," he said. "She always does. Not this time." I stacked the papers carefully and closed the box, the sound sharp in the still air. Through the window, the storm had cleared, leaving a thin band of blue on the horizon. I stayed there a while, watching it fade, knowing the next conversation would change everything. The attic stayed warm long after the afternoon-cooled sunlight, slipping through the narrow window in dusty stripes. I sat cross-legged among stacks of folders, sorting through every piece of proof that told the story my parents had never wanted to hear. The floor creaked beneath the weight of numbers: college tuition, down payments, loans for failed businesses. I built quiet columns of evidence until the truth took shape on the wooden boards in front of me. By the time I heard my father's voice downstairs, I already knew what had to happen next. "She'll come around," he said, his tone heavy with certainty. "She always does." I gathered the records into a neat stack, placed them inside a binder, and carried it down the attic stairs. Halfway down, I could hear my mother whispering in the kitchen, "Walter, we could lose everything." "What if she refuses?" "She won't," he said. "Hannah's responsible. She always has been." When I stepped into the kitchen, both of them looked up, startled. I set the binder on the table between us. "I've scheduled someone to meet us this evening," I said. My mother straightened. "Another lawyer." "No," I said. "A family therapist. Dr. Elaine Porter. She'll be here at 6. My father's eyebrows drew together. "Therapy. Hannah, that's not what we need. We need to focus on Brandon's case." I opened the binder and turned it toward them. "You'll get both. But this is non-negotiable." My mother reached for the binder, flipping through the pages. Her expression shifted as she scanned the spreadsheets. "What is all this?" 15 years of financial records," I said evenly. "Every transfer loan and investment you made for Brandon, and what you gave me in the same period." My father frowned. "You're keeping score now. I'm keeping track," I said. "Someone should have been." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, but he didn't say no. My mother kept turning pages until her hands began to tremble. "This can't be right," she whispered. "You had scholarships. You didn't need as much help." "I worked 3 jobs through law school," I said quietly. "I lived in a basement apartment with black mold. When my condo flooded 6 months ago, I asked for a short-term loan. You said you couldn't help. 2 days later, you wired Brandon $60,000 for his bar." Neither of them spoke. The clock above the stove ticked loud enough to fill the silence. "Dr. Porter will be here soon," I said. "If you want my help with Brandon's case, you'll be there." At 6 on the dot, the doorbell rang. My father opened it to a woman with silver-streaked hair and calm eyes. She carried a leather notebook and introduced herself with the kind of ease that left no space for protest. I led her to the living room and arranged the chairs in a circle beneath the wall of framed photographs, almost all of Brandon. "Thank you for meeting with me," Dr. Porter said as she settled in. Your daughter mentioned this is a difficult time. My mother clasped her hands in her lap. We're a close family, she said quickly. We've just had some challenges. I placed the binder in the center of the circle. I documented the financial support given to both of us over the years, I said. It's the clearest way to start. My father gave a short laugh, but it sounded strained. You really think money is the issue here? It's part of the pattern, I said. A reflection of where attention and trust have gone. Dr. Porter looked from one face to another. Why don't we begin with what each of you needed and whether you felt you received it? My mother shifted in her seat. Brandon needed more help. He's always struggled. Hannah's been independent since she was little. I met her eyes. Independent because I had to be. My father spoke quietly. We thought we were doing what was best for both of you. Then how did it end up like this, I asked. I opened the binder again, sliding a single page forward. $437,000 in support for Brandon. $8,500 for me. That's not balance. That's blindness. My mother's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. We wanted him to have a chance, and I didn't. I asked. The words hung there until even the ticking clock seemed to stop. Dr. Porter leaned forward slightly. This is painful work, but it's necessary, she said gently. Let's focus on accountability rather than blame. What happens next depends on what's acknowledged today. For the first time, my father looked directly at me. What do you want from us, Hannah? I'll recommend attorneys and advise on the financial side, I said. But I won't pay for Brandon's defense, and we continue therapy until we stop pretending this family only breaks one way. The session stretched late into the evening. By the time Dr. Porter left, the living room was quiet, and the wall of photographs seemed to watch us. My mother sat still, her eyes red but dry. My father poured himself a glass of water, took one sip, and set it down. No one spoke as I stood, walked to the mantel and placed something small beside Brandon's trophies, my old piano competition trophy, the one they'd missed for his baseball game. It looked almost lost between the shining frames, but it belonged there now. The next morning, the house was unusually still. I woke before dawn made coffee and watched mist rise off the front yard. My parents didn't come downstairs until nearly 8. My father carried a stack of mail. My mother wore the same sweater she'd had on the night before. We're meeting with Robert Keegan this afternoon, my father said without looking up. I'll join you, I said. The hours that followed passed in a blur of logistics, court dates, retainer agreements, and legal paperwork. But underneath every exchange was the echo of what had been said the night before. It sat between us at breakfast, followed us to the courthouse, and waited in the silence of the car ride home. That evening, as I gathered my things from the living room, my mother stopped me at the door. You were right to call Dr. Porter, she said quietly. It was overdue. Her voice carried something I hadn't heard from her before, a kind of humility that sounded both fragile and real. I nodded once, not trusting myself to answer. Later upstairs, I opened the window to let the cool air in. From below came the faint creak of the floorboards, my father pacing the kitchen the way he used to when work went bad. But now it was his son's choices, not his own, that kept him restless. Outside headlights moved across the street, catching on the maple leaves that framed the house. I thought about how easily patterns can survive years of silence, how long it takes for people to see what's right in front of them. Tomorrow would bring the next step, Brandon's plea hearing. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, the truth sat in the open, no longer tucked into boxes or hidden behind excuses. I closed the window and turned off the light, leaving the room dark, except for the faint reflection of my trophy downstairs. It caught a line of moonlight from the window, gleaming softly beside my brother's framed photos. A small start, but finally visible. The morning of the hearing came early, cool and pale, the kind of morning that hides its sharp edges behind fog. My father moved through the kitchen in silence, pouring coffee he didn't drink. My mother sat at the table clutching a tissue, her fingers twisting it until it tore. I buttoned my suit jacket and said, "The attorney will meet us outside the courthouse." They both nodded but said nothing. Outside, the air smelled like wet leaves, and the street was still slick from rain. The federal courthouse in downtown Hartford stood gray and massive against the overcast sky. News vans lined the curb, their antennae jutting upward like spears. A crowd of reporters waited near the steps, voices blending into a low hum that made the air feel charged. My mother's hand brushed my sleeve as we approached, trembling so slightly I almost didn't notice. "Remember what we talked about," I said quietly. "Let Robert handle the questions." "We say nothing." She nodded. My father straightened his tie, his eyes fixed ahead as if the courthouse might disappear if he stared hard enough. A marshal opened the heavy door, and we stepped inside. The lobby smelled faintly of polish and old paper. The echo of footsteps carried through the marble hall as we followed signs to courtroom 3. Robert Keegan met us outside the door, his silver hair neatly combed, his tone steady but firm. "Everything is in place for the plea agreement," he said. My mother blinked. "A plea? But what about a trial?" Robert glanced at me before answering. "A trial would not end well, Mrs. Cole. The plea is the best possible outcome." She looked from him to me. "You always said he was innocent." "He isn't," I said softly. "That's why we're here." The bailiff opened the doors, and we walked into a room filled with quiet tension. The ceiling arched high above us, light filtering through narrow windows that made everything feel distant and cold. Brandon sat at the defense table in a gray suit that didn't quite fit, his shoulders drawn in as if trying to shrink himself. When he turned, our eyes met. There was no smirk this time, no practiced charm, just a faint, uncertain flicker that passed quickly. The judge entered black robes moving like a current of air. "Court is now in session," she said, her voice calm but commanding. The prosecutor stood first, outlining the government's case: wire fraud, false statements, $2.5 million taken from investors under false pretenses. She spoke without malice, her words crisp and clinical. When she finished, the courtroom fell into a silence so deep that even the shuffle of paper seemed loud. "Mr. Cole," Judge Adler said, "you have agreed to plead guilty to 1 count of wire fraud. Do you understand the terms of your plea?" Brandon's voice came out rough. "Yes, Your Honor." "You understand the potential penalties?" "Yes." "Very well. Please stand." He rose, hands clasped in front of him, eyes fixed on the floor. When the judge read the sentence, her tone was measured. 18 months in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release, 6 months home confinement and full restitution to the victims. My mother made a sound soft and broken, as if something inside her gave way. My father reached for her hand, his own face pale. I sat still, feeling the weight of each word settle into the room like falling dust. Brandon lifted his eyes briefly toward me. For the first time in years, I saw something close to understanding there, an awareness that this time no one could fix it for him. When the gavel struck, the sound seemed to split the air. The judge stood the courtroom, rising with her. As she left, reporters outside the glass doors pressed closer, cameras flashing. Robert gathered his notes. "That's as good an outcome as we could have hoped for," he said quietly. I nodded. "Thank you." My mother's fingers clutched my arm. "There has to be another way," she whispered. "There isn't," I said. "It's done." Outside, the noise hit like a wave. Questions shouted, microphones thrust forward, flashes bursting through the overcast light. "Ms. Cole, how do you feel about your brother's conviction? Did the family know about the fraud?" Before my parents could answer, I stepped forward. "The Evans family acknowledges the harm caused by Brandon's actions," I said clearly. "He's accepted responsibility. The court has ruled and restitution will begin immediately." The reporters pressed closer, but I ended it there. No further questions. I turned away, leading my parents down the courthouse steps. The autumn air felt sharper now. The crowd's noise faded as we reached the street, leaving only the sound of our footsteps. My parents walked behind me slowly, hesitantly, as if they were unsure how to move without the weight of defending him. At the car, my father stopped and looked back at the courthouse. "I thought I knew him," he said quietly. "You did?" I answered. "You just didn't see the parts he kept hidden." He nodded once, then opened the door for my mother. She slid into the seat without a word. The drive home was nearly silent. The trees along the road had just started to turn a dull gold against the gray sky. At one intersection, my mother whispered, "What happens now?" "He serves his sentence," I said. "We start over." When we reached the house, I helped her inside. She moved slowly, stopping in the doorway of the living room. Her eyes landed on the mantel where my small trophy still sat beside Brandon's photos. She reached out as if to steady herself. "It looks different now," she said softly. I followed her gaze. "Maybe it always did," I said. That night, I stayed up late at the kitchen table, the case files stacked neatly beside me. The house was quiet except for the wind moving through the maple tree outside. I could hear my father upstairs, his footsteps pacing once, then stopping. The next morning, the headlines appeared online: Hartford business owner sentenced for investor fraud. The photograph showed Brandon walking into court, shoulders bowed, his parents a few steps behind him. My name wasn't mentioned, but the weight of the story was everywhere. By afternoon, neighbors began stopping by with awkward condolences. "He's a good boy," one said at the door, as if the words could rewrite everything. My father thanked them and closed the door each time, quieter with every visit. Later that evening, I stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled of rain and cooling earth. Across the street, lights glowed in the neighbors' windows, warm and steady. Inside, my parents spoke in low voices I couldn't make out. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to listen. The next day, we met Dr. Porter again. The session began in silence until she said gently, "Now that the verdict is behind us, how does the family move forward?" My father stared at his hands. "We start by admitting we were wrong," he said finally. My mother nodded beside him, her eyes still red but clearer. "We see him differently now. We see her differently too." Dr. Porter looked at me. "And you, Hannah? I'm not here to punish anyone," I said, "but I won't let things go back to how they were." When the session ended, my parents walked ahead of me to the car. The air outside felt cool and light, the kind that carried change. I stood for a moment under the courthouse trees before following them. Back at the house, I paused at the doorway, looking once more at the mantel. My small trophy caught the afternoon light gleaming against the framed photos that now looked like artifacts from another time. Tomorrow, I'd return to Chicago. But tonight, there was still something unfinished, a conversation waiting in the quiet space between forgiveness and consequence. The courthouse looked different when it wasn't filled with reporters. A week after Brandon's sentencing, I walked through the same doors again, this time for the victim restitution meeting. The marble floors still gleamed, but the echo of my heels seemed louder in the emptiness. A clerk directed me to a small conference room where the prosecutor waited along with two of the victims. One of them, a man in his 70s with shaking hands, looked up as I entered. His eyes were tired but kind. "You're his sister," he said softly. "Yes," I answered. "I'm here to make sure restitution is processed correctly." He nodded slowly. "Your father taught my business class years ago." I never thought his son would. He stopped himself, the rest hanging between us. I sat across from him, the fluorescent lights making everything too sharp, too real. The prosecutor went over the payment schedule, clear and methodical, while I took notes. Each number, each date felt like another step away from the chaos my brother had left behind. When the meeting ended, the older man stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for showing up," he said. "Most families don't." On the drive back, I passed the park where Brandon and I used to play catch as kids. The swings creaked in the wind, and for a moment I saw us there again, two children who hadn't yet learned what uneven love could do. I rolled the window down and let the air wash through the car before pulling onto the highway. When I got home, the house felt still. My parents were sitting at the dining table, the same binder of records spread out between them. My father looked up. "We spoke to Dr. Porter," he said. "She wants to continue weekly sessions." "That's good," I said, setting down my bag. My mother's eyes were puffy, but her voice was steadier than before. "She asked us to write letters to you, to Brandon, to ourselves. Things we never said." I nodded. "That's part of the work." My father pushed a folded piece of paper toward me. "This is mine." I hesitated, then unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar, the kind I'd once copied from his grocery lists. His words were careful, deliberate. He wrote about the first time he realized how differently he'd treated us, how every failure of Brandon's had felt like his own, while every success of mine had felt distant, almost borrowed. I thought I was protecting him, the letter said, but I was only protecting the part of myself that couldn't bear to see him fail. When I finished reading, I placed the paper back on the table. "Thank you," I said quietly. My mother didn't look up. "I haven't written mine yet," she murmured. "I'm not ready." "That's okay," I said. "You will be." That night, I stayed up late packing for my return to Chicago. The house around me felt different now, less like a place I'd escaped and more like one I'd finally understood. I paused at the living room doorway looking at the mantel. My small trophy still caught the faint glow from a nearby lamp. The space beside it where Brandon's framed article had once hung was empty. My mother had taken it down quietly the day after court. The next morning, she met me at the front door. "You'll call when you land," she asked. "I will," I said, and hugged her. She clung to me a moment longer than usual. On the flight, the clouds outside the window looked endless, soft and white against the blue. I closed my eyes and thought about the little girl who used to sit at the piano, waiting for someone to clap. She'd learned to keep playing even when the room was empty. When I got back to my apartment, the city greeted me with its usual rhythm traffic below the hum of the L in the distance. Ethan met me at the door, his sleeves rolled up, the smell of coffee filling the room. "You're home," he said simply. "I am." He took my suitcase, then pulled me close. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Over the next few weeks, life began to settle into something that almost felt normal again. I threw myself into work, catching up on cases that had waited too long. Marissa stopped by my office one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe with a knowing smile. "You look like someone who finally exhaled," she said. "Something like that," I said, smiling back. She glanced at the framed certificate on my wall, then at the photograph of me and Ethan on the shelf. "When the dust clears, it's strange, isn't it? You realize how heavy the air's been all along." I nodded. "It's lighter now." That evening, I called my parents. My mother answered, her voice softer than I remembered. "Your father's in the garden," she said. "He planted late this year, but the tomatoes are coming in." We talked for a while about small things, the weather, her volunteer work at the library, the therapy sessions that were getting easier. Then she said, "Your brother wrote again. He wanted to know how you're doing. Did you write back?" "I did," she said. "He's different. Humble, maybe. It's early, but he's trying." When I hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet. The city lights stretched beyond the window, thousands of small squares of yellow and white. Somewhere inside that glow, life kept moving steady, ordinary, and honest. A week later, a letter arrived addressed in my brother's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. His words were uneven, full of apology, but free of excuses. He wrote about the people he'd met in prison programs, about how he finally understood what trust really meant. He ended with a line that surprised me. "I used to think being loved meant never being told no. Now I know it means being told the truth." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. I wasn't ready to answer yet, but I would. That evening, Ethan found me standing by the window. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Just thinking." He wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "About what? About how long it takes to grow up," I said. He smiled faintly. "Some people never do." We stood there for a while, watching the lights flicker against the glass. In the reflection, I saw both of us two people who had built something steady out of chaos. The following weekend, I returned briefly to Hartford to help my parents finalize some paperwork. The town felt smaller than it used to, the streets quieter. When I walked into the house, my father was in the kitchen sorting through a stack of old photos. "We're clearing some space," he said. "Feels good." He handed me a small frame, my high school graduation photo. "I found this behind a stack of Brandon's." I smiled faintly. "Maybe hang it up again." He nodded. "Already did." Later, as I left, I looked back through the doorway. My photo now hung beside one of Brandon from when we were children, two kids on a swing set laughing at something only we could see. For once, the wall looked balanced. Driving back to Chicago that night, the highway stretched out under the fading sky. The last light of day painted the clouds gold before slipping into blue. Somewhere ahead was the life I'd chosen, the one I'd built on my own terms. But behind me, for the first time, home didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a place learning how to heal. As the miles rolled by, I thought about the upcoming holidays, about what it might be like to have everyone in the same room again. There was still distance between us, still years of silence to fill, but maybe this time the conversations would start differently. Maybe they'd begin with listening. The first cold wind of November swept across Chicago the morning I set the table for Thanksgiving. The scent of cinnamon and roasted vegetables filled the apartment, and soft jazz played from a speaker tucked near the window. I arranged crimson chrysanthemums in a glass vase, their color deep against the cream tablecloth. Ethan moved easily through the kitchen, carving the turkey he'd spent half the day tending. "Your parents said they're on their way," he said. "Flight landed half an hour ago." I nodded, smoothing the napkins one last time. "It feels strange," I admitted. "First Thanksgiving together in years." He smiled gently. "Strange can be good." The doorbell rang just as the last bit of sunlight faded. When I opened the door, my parents stood there looking smaller than I remembered, but somehow lighter, too. My mother's hair had more silver in it, her makeup soft and simple. My father held a leather portfolio under one arm and a bottle of wine in the other. "Hannah," my mother said with a small, careful smile. "We made it." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. As they entered, my mother handed me the portfolio. "I found something in the attic. Thought you might want it back." Inside were my old piano scores, the pages yellowed around the edges. "Thank you," I said, running my thumb over a faded note in my own handwriting. My father handed Ethan the wine. "We drove past your firm on the way here," he said. "Saw your name on the door. Congratulations on that case the Tribune mentioned. Fine work, Hannah." It caught me off guard, the simple pride in his voice, unadorned, without a hint of comparison. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." We moved to the living room where family photos lined the shelves, mine, Ethan's, and a few of Brandon as a kid. My parents noticed them right away. My mother's gaze lingered on one where Brandon and I were laughing in our backyard water balloons mid-flight. She smiled faintly. "I'd forgotten that summer," she said. Dinner passed more easily than I expected. Conversation stayed gentle, the way people talk when they're relearning each other's rhythm. My father talked about volunteering at the community college, teaching financial literacy to first-generation students. "Feels good to give back," he said. "Someone should have taught us those lessons years ago." My mother described their new condo, smaller, cozier, closer to the library, where she now helped with children's reading programs. At one point, Ethan asked quietly, "Have you heard from Brandon?" My parents exchanged a look. My father nodded. "He writes regularly. His tone's different now. He's learning what humility feels like." My mother added, "He asked about you in his last letter, said he wanted to know how you were doing." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I simply nodded. "That's good," I said finally. After dinner, while Ethan and my father washed dishes, my mother and I packed leftovers into small containers. The air between us felt warmer than it had in years. She paused, her hand resting on the countertop. "I owe you an apology," she said softly, "for thinking you didn't need us. I told myself you were stronger, that you'd be fine. I was wrong." Her voice caught slightly, and I set down the container, waiting. "You were the one holding this family together, even when we didn't see it. I'm sorry for making you feel invisible." I placed my hand over hers. "You're seeing it now," I said. "That's enough." She smiled through her tears. "I don't deserve that kind of grace." "Maybe not," I said gently, "but you're still getting it." Later, when we returned to the table for dessert, my father raised his glass. "To second chances," he said, "and hard truths." Ethan lifted his own. "And to the ones brave enough to face both." We clinked glasses, the sound soft and bright. After my parents went to bed in the guest room, Ethan and I lingered on the couch. The city lights stretched across the skyline, steady and golden. "You did it," he said. "You changed the story." I shook my head. We all did, finally. The next morning, my mother joined me in the kitchen while coffee brewed. She held a letter in her hand. "Brandon's latest," she said. "He mentioned something you might want to read." She unfolded the page and read aloud a line near the end. "Tell Hannah I'm proud of her. She didn't give up on me even when I deserved it." The words settled over the room quietly. I stared at the window where frost traced delicate patterns on the glass. "He's still got time to make things right," I said. "He's trying," she said, "and for once, it feels real." We sipped our coffee in silence, the smell rich and familiar. Outside, snow began to fall in slow, heavy flakes. By the afternoon, they were packed to leave. My father hugged Ethan, promising to call soon, and then turned to me. "We'll see you for Christmas if that's all right." "I'd like that," I said. As their car pulled away, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, glowing against the pale snow. I stood by the window until their taillights disappeared, then turned to see Ethan hanging their coats by the door. The house felt different now, full not because of the people inside it, but because of what had been mended there. That evening I opened the piano portfolio my mother had brought. The pages rustled softly as I turned through them, each marked with pencil notes from years ago. I chose one piece simple and slow and sat down at the piano. My fingers hesitated on the keys, then found their way. The melody filled the apartment warm and steady, weaving through the rooms until it reached the window. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and endless, covering the city in white. When I finished, Ethan was leaning in the doorway, smiling. "You haven't played in years," he said. "I think I just needed a reason to start again." He crossed the room and kissed the top of my head. "Welcome back, Hannah." I closed the piano gently, the last note fading into quiet. Somewhere out there, my brother was serving the last months of his sentence. My parents were rebuilding brick by brick. And here in this apartment overlooking the city, life had finally begun to sound like peace. As I turned off the lights and followed Ethan to bed, the soft echo of the piano lingered in the air, a reminder that even broken chords can resolve if you keep playing long enough. Snow still covered the city the next morning, soft and unbroken across the rooftops. The light that filtered through the windows was pale and still, the kind that makes time feel slower. Ethan left early for the hospital, leaving a note beside my coffee mug that simply said, "Proud of you." I stood by the window looking out at the skyline, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing between two worlds. I was just where I belonged. The days that followed felt different, quiet in the best way. Work at the firm picked up, but I found a rhythm that didn't drown me. I started leaving on time, walking home along the lake, even when the air bit cold against my face. My phone buzzed with small updates from my parents' photos of my father's garden, my mother's library group, short notes about the therapy sessions they were still attending. There was an ease in their messages that hadn't existed before. One evening, a letter arrived in my mailbox addressed in careful handwriting. It was from Brandon. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope resting between my fingers for a long time before I opened it. His words were steady this time, free of excuses, filled with gratitude. He wrote about the classes he was taking in prison, about mentoring younger inmates who reminded him of the person he used to be. Near the end, he said, "You were right to stop saving me. It made me save myself." I read that line twice before folding the letter back into the envelope. A few months later, he called for the first time. The connection was faint, the line filled with small bursts of static. "Hey, Hannah," he said, his voice uncertain. "Hi, Brandon." There was a pause, then a breath. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry for everything." "I know," I said, "and I believe you." We didn't say much more. But when the call ended, the silence felt different, no longer heavy, just open. Spring came early that year. When my parents visited for Easter, the city was starting to bloom again. We walked through the park, the grass still damp underfoot. My mother linked her arm through mine, and my father pointed out a row of tulips near the path. "They remind me of the ones your grandmother planted," he said. His voice held a kind of peace I hadn't heard from him in years. Back at the apartment, the four of us sat around the table sharing coffee and pie. Ethan asked about Brandon's next review hearing, and my father nodded. "He'll be eligible for early release this fall," he said. "He's already started paying restitution from the work program." "That's good," I said. My mother smiled faintly. "He said he wants to visit when he's out, but only if you're comfortable with it." "I think I will be," I said, and I meant it. After they left, I stood by the window again, watching the sky shift toward evening. The city below glowed gold against the water lights flickering on, one by one. I thought about how far we'd all come, the choices that broke us, the truths that finally set us free. That night, I sat at my desk and began outlining a new project I'd been thinking about for months, a nonprofit foundation that would offer legal guidance for victims of financial abuse within families. The idea had grown slowly, piece by piece, until it felt too real to ignore. I wanted to use what I knew to help people who didn't have the voice or resources I did. I could already picture the name on the door, the Cole Foundation for Family Justice. When Ethan came home, I told him about it, and he smiled. "That sounds exactly like you," he said. I looked around the apartment, the life we'd built together, and realized how full it finally felt. Not perfect, not untouched, but whole. Months later, on a bright September afternoon, I stood at a community center podium and watched my parents sit in the front row during the foundation's first event. My mother was wiping her eyes, and my father clapped with quiet pride. Brandon couldn't be there yet, but a letter from him sat folded in my pocket, ending with the words, "You turned what broke us into something that helps others stand." As the applause rose around me, I looked out at the small crowd, families, students, neighbors, and felt something lift inside me. I wasn't the forgotten child anymore. I was the woman who learned to draw a line and build something beautiful on the other side of it. That night, when the lights dimmed and the guests went home, I stood alone by the window of the event hall. The city shimmered beyond the glass, and for a moment I thought about the path that led here, the late nights, the silence, the small acts of courage that didn't feel like courage at all at the time. Justice, I realized, doesn't always arrive in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it's in the quiet forgiveness that follows truth, or the way a family learns to speak honestly after years of pretending. I don't know what comes next for us, but I know this love built on truth is stronger than any illusion of perfection. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is permission to stop earning love that should have been yours all along. If you've ever carried the weight of being overlooked or underestimated, I hope my story reminds you that peace is still possible, that dignity grows from every boundary you keep, and if it did, share it with someone who might need to hear it tonight.